The small village of Monterosso, nestled in the rolling hills of northern Italy, was not a place known for producing musical prodigies. Life there in the 1940s moved with the seasons, planting in spring, harvesting in fall, and enduring the cold winters huddled around fireplaces in stone houses that had stood for generations. In one such house lived the Bianchi family. They were neither rich nor poor by village standards, though the war years had been hard on everyone. Their small home was made special by one treasure, an upright piano that had belonged to Mrs. Bianchi's grandmother. It sat in the corner of their main room, its wood worn smooth from years of use, some keys yellowed with age. Little Lucia Bianchi was just 4 years old when she first approached the piano. Her mother found her reaching up to touch the keys, standing on tiptoes, her small fingers barely able to press them down. Mrs. Bianchi smiled and lifted her daughter onto the bench, expecting the child to bang randomly as children do. Instead, Lucia carefully pressed one key at a time, listening intently to each note before moving to the next. She has a good ear, her father said that night, but thought little more of it. In those post-war years, practical matters took priority. Mr. Bianchi worked hard at the local mill, while Mrs. Bianchi managed their home and small garden. By age 6, Lucia had taught herself to play simple melodies by ear. The local church organist, Mr. Rossi, happened to hear her one afternoon while visiting her parents. The old man's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He asked if he could give Lucia some basic lessons as a favor to the family. "She has a gift," Mr. Rossi told her parents a few months later. "I've never seen a child learn so quickly. She remembers everything I show her after seeing it just once." The family couldn't afford proper music lessons, but Mr. Rossi brought her sheet music when he could and taught her to read notes. Lucia soaked up knowledge like the dry earth soaks up rain after a drought. By age 9, she was playing pieces that would challenge students twice her age. The piano became her refuge. While other children played in the village square, Lucia hurried home from school to practice. Her small hands stretched and grew stronger as she tackled increasingly difficult music. Sometimes her mother would pause in her cooking, wooden spoon in hand, listening to her daughter play with growing amazement. When Lucia was 12, Mr. Rossi arranged for her to play at the church's Christmas service. The villagers were stunned by the music that flowed from her fingers. She played traditional hymns but added flourishes that made them sound new, delicate runs and harmonies that seemed to make the old church glow with more than just candlelight. After the service, several people approached her parents. She should study at the conservatory in Milan, one well-traveled villager suggested. This kind of talent shouldn't be hidden away in Monterosso. For the first time, her parents began to wonder if Lucia's gift might lead to something more. But conservatories cost money they didn't have, and the thought of sending their daughter to the big city frightened them. "Music is a beautiful hobby," her father told Lucia that night. "But it's not a secure future, especially for a girl. Better to focus on your regular studies." Lucia nodded obediently, but something inside her dimmed a little. In her heart, music wasn't just something she did. It was who she was. As she entered her teenage years, Lucia's talent only grew. She began creating her own compositions, simple at first, then increasingly complex. She filled notebooks with musical notations, sometimes waking in the night to capture a melody that had come to her in a dream. Mr. Rossi, now in his 70s, could teach her little more. "I'm holding her back," he confessed to her parents. "She needs proper training." When Lucia turned 16, an unexpected opportunity arose. A music professor from Turin was visiting relatives in a neighboring village and agreed to hear her play. The professor, a stern woman with gray hair pulled tightly back, sat silently as Lucia performed a Bach prelude, followed by one of her own compositions. "Where did you study?" the professor asked when she finished. "Only with our church organist, ma'am," Lucia replied softly. The professor looked genuinely surprised. "Your technique needs refinement, but you have something rare, a distinctive voice. I could arrange an audition at the conservatory in Turin." For days, the Bianchi household was filled with tense discussions. Lucia's mother had begun to support the idea, seeing how music breathed life into her daughter. But her father remained firm. "Musicians starve," he said, "even talented ones. And a young woman alone in the city? It's not safe, not proper." Lucia didn't argue openly. It wasn't her way. But each night she played her heart out on the old piano, as if trying to make her parents understand through music what she couldn't say in words. It was during this uncertain time that Lucia first visited the convent of St. Cecilia, located on a hillside just outside the village. The nuns there ran a small school and occasionally hosted community events. Lucia was asked to play for a spring festival, and while there she noticed a beautiful small chapel with excellent acoustics. During a break she slipped inside and played softly, enchanted by how the notes seemed to float in the air. Sister Chiara, a middle-aged nun with kind eyes, found her there. Instead of scolding her, the nun sat quietly until Lucia finished playing. "Saint Cecilia is the patron saint of musicians," Sister Chiara told her. "Music can be a form of prayer, you know, a way to speak to God without words." Something about this idea resonated deeply with Lucia. Over the following months, she visited the convent often, sometimes playing for the nuns, sometimes just talking with Sister Chiara about her uncertain future. "The sisters here have many duties," Sister Chiara explained, "but we also nurture our God-given talents. Sister Agnes paints beautiful icons. Sister Benedetta writes poetry. I believe God gives us these gifts for a reason." "My father says music won't put food on the table," Lucia confided. Sister Chiara nodded thoughtfully. "That's often true. But when we join the convent, our basic needs are met, allowing us to serve in many ways, including through our talents." The idea took root in Lucia's heart. Perhaps the convent could be a place where both sides of herself, her spiritual nature and her musical soul, could exist together. When she tentatively mentioned this possibility to her parents, they were surprised but not opposed. A religious life was respectable, even honorable. As her 18th birthday approached, Lucia made her decision. The Turin Conservatory had indeed offered her a spot after hearing a recording Mr. Rossi had managed to make, but the financial obstacles seemed insurmountable. Meanwhile, Sister Chiara had spoken with the Mother Superior, who assured Lucia that her musical gifts would be valued at the convent. "We could use your talent in our services," the Mother Superior had said during Lucia's visit, "and perhaps you could teach music to some of the local children as part of our community outreach." On a bright September morning, Lucia Bianchi said goodbye to her parents and the old piano that had been her first teacher. She carried little with her to the convent of St. Cecilia: some clothes, her notebooks of compositions, and dreams of a life filled with both devotion and music. The convent welcomed her warmly as a postulant, the first step on the path to taking full vows. The first few weeks were busy with learning the routines and rhythms of convent life. Lucia embraced it all with the same dedication she'd always given to music, finding beauty in the ordered days and shared prayers. But when she finally found time to visit the music room she'd been promised, disappointment awaited. The piano was actually a small organ, suitable for hymns but little else. The Mother Superior explained that the previous music teacher, an elderly nun who had passed away the year before, had only used it for teaching basic hymns to the choir. "We focus primarily on traditional church music here," the Mother Superior explained, her tone gentle but firm. "Modern compositions can sometimes distract from true devotion. I'm sure you understand." Lucia did not understand, but she nodded politely. Sister Chiara, seeing her distress, tried to reassure her. "Give it time," she whispered later. "Mother Superior is traditional, but she's fair. Show her how your music can enhance worship, not distract from it." Weeks passed, then months. Lucia, now called Sister Lucia during her postulancy, was allowed to play for Sunday services but only approved hymns, exactly as written in the church books. Her notebooks of compositions remained untouched, hidden beneath her simple clothing in the small drawer beside her bed. As the seasons changed and Lucia moved toward taking her first temporary vows, a growing realization settled over her like a heavy cloak. The convent would provide security, community, and a spiritual home, but not the musical freedom she had secretly hoped for. The Mother Superior, while kind in many ways, held firm views about appropriate religious music and saw Lucia's creative impulses as potentially self-indulgent. On the day she took her first vows and officially became Sister Lucia, her parents watched with proud tears. They couldn't understand why their daughter's smile seemed tinged with sadness, or why her hands sometimes moved unconsciously, as if playing invisible keys. That night, alone in her small room, the newly named Sister Lucia made a private vow of her own. She would embrace her religious life with genuine devotion, but she would not abandon the music that lived inside her. If she couldn't play it on a piano, she would hear it in her mind. If she couldn't share it with the world, she would share it with God alone. She took out a blank notebook and began to write, the notes flowing onto the page like a river that had been temporarily dammed, but had found a new path forward. This would be her secret devotion, her private conversation with the divine. Little did she know that this first night of hidden composition was the beginning of a decades-long journey that would eventually lead her, music and her, out of the shadows and into the light of a waiting world. The years passed like pages turning. In a book, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but always moving forward. Sister Lucia's dark hair gradually streaked with silver, and fine lines appeared around her eyes, marks of a life lived with both joy and silent longing. 50 years at the HOA Convent of St. Cecilia had transformed the passionate young pianist into a respected elder among the sisters. Now 78, Sister Lucia was known for her kindness, patience, and unwavering devotion. Younger nuns often sought her guidance, finding in her a compassionate listener who seemed to understand struggles she had never voiced herself. What none of them knew, not even Sister Chiara, who had become her closest friend until passing away some 5 years earlier, was that Sister Lucia had never stopped composing music. Her secret had been carefully guarded through decades of convent life. In the beginning, she had composed only in her mind, afraid even to write the notes down. But the music kept coming, flowing through her like an underground river, and eventually she had to find ways to capture it. She began with scraps of paper hidden between the pages of her prayer books. Later, when she was trusted with ordering supplies for the convent school, she occasionally added a blank music notebook to the list, claiming it was for teaching the children. These precious notebooks were her greatest treasure. She kept them hidden in a false bottom she had carefully created in the old wooden chest at the foot of her bed. 50 years of music, her true prayers, her deepest expressions of both human longing and divine joy, lay carefully preserved in that secret place. At night, when the convent was asleep, Sister Lucia would sometimes take out a notebook and silently play her compositions on an imaginary keyboard, her aged fingers moving with surprising nimbleness over her blanket. She could hear every note perfectly in her mind, the delicate melodies, the complex harmonies, the dramatic shifts in tempo and mood. These compositions were far more sophisticated than the simple pieces she had written as a teenager. They reflected a lifetime of thought, prayer, and inner musical development. Mother Beatrice, who had replaced the previous Mother Superior some 20 years earlier, had eventually allowed Sister Lucia to play more expressive arrangements of traditional hymns during services. But creating entirely new compositions was still discouraged as potentially prideful, putting one's own expression above established tradition. So Sister Lucia kept her true musical self hidden, playing the approved music beautifully while her own compositions remained silent, except in her imagination. The convent had modernized somewhat over the decades. They now had a decent upright piano in the music room, used mostly for teaching children from the village who came for lessons twice a week. Sister Lucia taught these lessons with quiet joy, recognizing in some of her students echoes of her own childhood passion. "My fingers don't move like they used to," she often told the children when they marveled at her playing. But music isn't just in the fingers. It's in the heart and mind first. What she didn't tell them was how arthritis had begun to stiffen her joints, making real playing increasingly painful. Each year it became harder to demonstrate techniques to her students, though she never complained. Instead, she found ways to teach more with words and less with demonstration, guiding her students' hands rather than showing them directly. Winter was always the hardest season for her hands. The cold seemed to settle into her bones, making her fingers particularly stiff in the mornings. It was during one such winter morning that everything changed. Sister Gabriella, at 62, one of the younger senior nuns, noticed Sister Lucia struggling to button her cardigan before morning prayers. Without comment, she gently helped, her own fingers still nimble enough for the task. Sister Gabriella had joined the convent in her 30s after a career as a nurse, and her practical nature made her valuable in caring for the older sisters. "The cold makes it worse," Sister Lucia admitted with a small smile, "but spring will come eventually." "You should see Dr. Ricci when he visits next week," Sister Gabriella suggested. There are better treatments for arthritis now than just waiting for spring. Sister Lucia nodded but changed the subject. She had lived with the pain so long it had become a familiar companion. Besides, what good would more mobile fingers do when she still couldn't play the music that mattered most to her? 3 days later, Sister Lucia developed a fever. Nothing too serious, just a winter chill that had settled in her chest. But Mother Beatrice insisted she rest in bed, missing both prayers and her teaching duties. Sister Gabriella was assigned to check on her and bring her meals. "Is there anything you need from your room?" Sister Gabriella asked, plumping the pillows behind Sister Lucia in the convent's small infirmary. "Your prayer book? Rosary beads?" "No, thank you," Sister Lucia replied, though in truth she was already missing her notebooks. During restless nights, she often reviewed her compositions, making small adjustments and additions. It helped her sleep to work through musical problems in her mind. That afternoon, while Sister Lucia dozed, Mother Beatrice decided that her room should be thoroughly cleaned and aired out to prevent any lingering germs. She assigned Sister Gabriella to the task. "Make sure to change her bedding and dust everything thoroughly," Mother Beatrice instructed. Sister Lucia has always been private about her space, but health must come first. Sister Gabriella nodded and set to work. She stripped the bed, swept the floor, and dusted the few simple possessions in the small room. When she came to the wooden chest at the foot of the bed, she decided it should be emptied and wiped down inside as well. The chest contained mostly what she expected: extra blankets, a few books, winter garments. But as she lifted the final blanket, her fingers detected something odd about the bottom of the chest. It seemed to shift slightly under pressure. Curious, she examined it more closely and discovered the false bottom, cleverly designed to be almost invisible. Sister Gabriella hesitated. She had no wish to invade Sister Lucia's privacy, but what if these were important medical documents that might explain some health issue, or instructions for after her passing? At 78, Sister Lucia was still relatively healthy, but such preparations wouldn't be unusual. Carefully, she lifted the false bottom. Instead of medical documents, she found a stack of music notebooks, at least 20 of them, filled with handwritten compositions. Each was dated and titled in Sister Lucia's neat handwriting. She opened one from the middle of the stack, dated some 20 years earlier. The composition was titled "Moonlight on Monte Rosso," a reference to Sister Lucia's home village. Sister Gabriella couldn't read music well, having only basic training from childhood, but even she could tell these were complex compositions. Page after page of intricate notations, with small notes in the margins indicating tempo changes, emotional qualities, even specific images or prayers that had inspired certain passages. She sat back on her heels, stunned by her discovery. All these years, Sister Lucia had been creating music that no one had ever heard. The most recent notebook had entries from just a few weeks ago, a lifetime of secret creativity hidden away in this chest. Sister Gabriella carefully replaced everything exactly as she had found it, her mind racing. What should she do with this knowledge? Telling Mother Beatrice felt like a betrayal of Sister Lucia's privacy. But keeping these beautiful creations hidden also seemed wrong somehow. For several days she said nothing, checking on Sister Lucia regularly as her fever subsided. She watched the elderly nun with new eyes, wondering about the private world of music that existed within her. What would these compositions sound like if actually played? How had Sister Lucia maintained this secret passion for so many decades without anyone knowing? One evening, as Sister Lucia was recovering her strength but still confined to the infirmary, Sister Gabriella brought her dinner tray with a pot of chamomile tea. After ensuring they were alone, she sat beside the bed. "I need to confess something," she said quietly. "When I was cleaning your room, I found your music notebooks." Sister Lucia's face paled, and her hands trembled slightly as she set down her teacup. "I didn't show them to anyone," Sister Gabriella quickly assured her, "and I've put everything back exactly as it was." "But sister," her voice softened, "why have you kept your music hidden all these years?" Sister Lucia was quiet for so long that Sister Gabriella thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Music has always been my most honest prayer. But Mother Superior, the one before Mother Beatrice, felt that original compositions were expressions of pride rather than devotion. She believed we should stick to the traditional hymns and prayers. She paused, looking down at her gnarled hands. After a while, it became easier to keep my music between myself and God alone. But these are prayers, Sister Gabriella insisted. Beautiful ones, from what little I could understand. Doesn't Scripture tell us to make a joyful noise unto the Lord? To sing new songs? A small smile touched Sister Lucia's lips. You sound like Sister Chiara. She used to say similar things. Did she know about your compositions? No, no one did. I almost told her many times, but... Sister Lucia shook her head. It became my secret conversation with God. Perhaps I was afraid that sharing it would somehow make it less special. Sister Gabriella reached out and gently took Sister Lucia's hand, mindful of her arthritic joints. Or perhaps more special, because it could touch others as well. God gives us gifts to share, doesn't he? Sister Lucia didn't respond directly, but a thoughtful expression crossed her face. I'm sorry for invading your privacy, Sister Gabriella continued. I won't mention it to anyone if that's what you prefer. But I think your music deserves to be heard, sister, even if just here among us. I'm an old woman with stiff fingers, Sister Lucia said softly, and these compositions exist only in my notebooks. They've never been played aloud, except in your heart, Sister Gabriella replied, where they've been playing for 50 years. That night, Sister Lucia lay awake thinking about their conversation. She had grown so accustomed to keeping her music private that the thought of sharing it was both thrilling and terrifying. What if her compositions weren't as beautiful when actually played as they were in her imagination? What if decades of isolation from the musical world had made her work strange or outdated? Yet Sister Gabriella's words echoed in her mind. God gives us gifts to share. Perhaps her secret conversation with God had been meant to include others all along. Perhaps even at 78, it wasn't too late for her music to find its voice in the world. Spring arrived at the convent of St. Cecilia, bringing with it warmer days and the sweet scent of blossoming trees in the courtyard. Sister Lucia's health had improved. Though the arthritis in her hands remained a daily challenge, her conversation with Sister Gabriella had awakened something inside her, a quiet wondering about what might happen if her music finally found its way into the world after all these years. Still, she had made no move to share her compositions. Some habits, especially those reinforced over 50 years, are not easily broken. She returned to teaching the village children twice a week. Her secret still safe except for Sister Gabriella, who respected her privacy and said nothing more about the hidden notebooks. One crisp April morning, Mother Beatrice called a special meeting of all the sisters. The convent's old stone walls had been showing their age for years, with several areas needing significant repair. The roof above the east dormitory had begun to leak during the winter rains, and the heating system was becoming dangerously unreliable. The estimates for repairs are substantial, Mother Beatrice explained, her usually serene face lined with worry. Our annual donations have decreased as the village population has declined. I've consulted with the diocese, but funds are tight everywhere. The sisters listened solemnly. Their simple lifestyle had always been sustainable through careful management and community support. But major structural repairs were another matter entirely. We need to raise at least 40,000 euros for the essential repairs, Mother Beatrice continued. I've been praying for guidance, and I believe we should organize a community fundraising event. Something that showcases our convent's place in the community and reminds people of the services we provide. Sister Francesca, who coordinated the convent's small medical clinic, suggested a health fair. Sister Benedetta proposed selling the jams and preserves they made from their garden's produce. Various ideas were discussed, but none seemed likely to generate the substantial sum they needed. What about a concert? Sister Gabriella suggested suddenly. The chapel has wonderful acoustics. We could invite that young pianist who played for Easter Mass last year, Antonio Ferretti. I heard he's been gaining quite a reputation in Turin. Mother Beatrice looked thoughtful. That's an interesting idea. Classical music concerts can command respectable ticket prices, especially for a good cause. The sisters nodded in agreement. Their chapel, though small, was one of the most beautiful buildings in the region, with stained glass windows dating back to the 16th century and remarkable acoustics that seemed to catch every note and transform it into something heavenly. Antonio's mother was one of my students, Sister Lucia added quietly. He's very talented, and perhaps some of our more advanced students might perform a piece to open the program. Plans quickly took shape. Sister Gabriella volunteered to contact Antonio, while others began discussing refreshments, ticket sales, and how to spread the word throughout the surrounding villages and towns. For the first time in weeks, the atmosphere in the convent felt hopeful. Later that afternoon, Sister Gabriella found Sister Lucia in the garden, sitting on a stone bench beneath a flowering pear tree. The elderly nun was flexing her fingers slowly, a daily exercise she performed to maintain what mobility she could. "I spoke with Antonio's mother on the phone," Sister Gabriella said, sitting beside her. "Unfortunately, Antonio is committed to a concert series in Milan for the next 2 months. He sends his apologies but can't help us." Sister Lucia's face fell. "That's disappointing. Have you told Mother Beatrice?" "Not yet. I wanted to speak with you first." Sister Gabriella hesitated, then pressed on. "Sister Lucia, this might be the perfect opportunity to share your music with the world. Your compositions could be the centerpiece of our concert." Sister Lucia shook her head firmly. "I haven't actually played most of these pieces, only imagined them. And my hand," she looked down at her gnarled fingers. "I can barely play simple hymns without pain now. What about finding someone else to play them?" "That young music teacher in the village, Paolo. He studied at the conservatory in Turin. Perhaps he could look at your compositions?" A mix of emotions crossed Sister Lucia's face, longing, fear, and something else that might have been hope. "I don't know," she said finally. "These pieces are so personal. What if they're not as good as I imagine? What if they're outdated or strange? Then we'll have tried something new," Sister Gabriella said simply. "But what if they're beautiful? What if they're exactly what people need to hear?" For several days, Sister Lucia wrestled with the decision. At night, she prayed for guidance, asking God whether her music was meant to remain a private devotion or if, after all these years, it was time to share it. The answer came in an unexpected way. On Sunday morning, the elderly pipe organ they used for services wheezed, coughed, and finally gave out completely in the middle of the opening hymn. The sisters continued singing a cappella, but it was clear that the ancient instrument had finally reached the end of its life. "Another expense we can't afford," Mother Beatrice sighed after the service. "We'll have to manage without music until after the fundraiser." That evening, Sister Lucia carefully removed her newest composition book from its hiding place. The piece on top, titled Echoes of Faith, was one she had been refining for almost 2 years. It had come to her during a particularly beautiful sunset, when the chapel's stained glass had cast rainbow patterns across the stone floor. The next morning, she asked Sister Gabriella to accompany her to the village. Despite the questioning look on her friend's face, she offered no explanation until they stood outside the modest home of Paolo Ricci, the local music teacher. "I think I'd like his opinion on something," Sister Lucia said quietly, clutching her notebook. Paolo welcomed them warmly. In his mid-30s, he had a kind face and the ink-stained fingers of someone who spent hours notating music. His small living room was dominated by an upright piano covered with sheet music and music theory books. "Sister Lucia, what a pleasant surprise. Are you here about the children's lessons?" he asked, clearing books from chairs so they could sit. "Not exactly," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I understand you studied composition at the conservatory." "Yes, that's right." He looked curious. Sister Lucia placed her notebook on the table between them. "I've written some music over the years. Nothing that's ever been played. I wondered if you might look at it and tell me. Tell me if it has any merit." Paolo's eyebrows rose in surprise, but he took the notebook respectfully. As he opened it and began to scan the first page of Echoes of Faith, his expression changed from polite interest to genuine concentration. He turned pages slowly, occasionally making a soft sound of appreciation. Sister Lucia sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, hardly breathing. Beside her, Sister Gabriella reached over and gave her fingers a gentle, encouraging squeeze. After what seemed an eternity, Paolo looked up. There was a strange expression on his face, something between confusion and awe. "Sister Lucia," he said slowly, "this is remarkable work. The harmonic structure, the thematic development. May I ask where you studied composition?" "I didn't," she replied simply. "I just hear it in my mind." He shook his head in disbelief. "And you've written other pieces like this?" "Many, over the years." Paolo turned back to the composition, running his finger along a particular passage. "Would you mind if I played a section? Just to hear how it sounds?" Sister Lucia nodded, suddenly unable to speak. After 50 years of silence, her music was about to be heard for the first time by ears other than her own inner ear. Paolo sat at the piano, positioned his hands, and began to play. The opening notes of echoes of faith filled the small room, delicate at first like droplets of water, then building into a flowing stream of sound that seemed to capture both longing and fulfillment. Question and answer, human searching and divine response. Sister Lucia closed her eyes. It was both exactly as she had imagined and somehow more. The notes she had heard for so long in her mind were now vibrating in the air, touching not just her heart but those of others. A tear slid down her cheek. When Paolo finished the section, the room fell silent. Sister Gabriella was staring open-mouthed at her elderly friend. Paolo turned on the piano bench, his face flushed with excitement. Sister Lucia, this is extraordinary. It's unlike anything I've heard before. It has elements of classical structure but with harmonies that feel completely fresh. How many more compositions do you have like this? 19 notebooks, Sister Gabriella answered when Sister Lucia seemed too overwhelmed to speak. 50 years of work, Paolo's eyes widened. This could be your concert. Not just a fundraiser for the convent, but a musical revelation. A premiere of work that deserves to be heard. Sister Lucia finally found her voice. I'm just an old nun who writes down the music she hears in her heart. No one would be interested in that. You're wrong, Paolo said gently but firmly. People are always drawn to authenticity and beauty. And this, he tapped the notebook, has both in abundance. The walk back to the convent was quiet, both nuns lost in thought. Sister Lucia felt as though a door long locked had suddenly swung open, letting in light and air. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. What will you tell Mother Beatrice? Sister Gabriella asked as they approached the convent gates. Sister Lucia looked up at the old stone building that had been her home for 5 decades, a place where she had both found and lost herself, where she had hidden her truest expression while living a life of outward devotion. I'll tell her that God works in mysterious ways, she said, a small smile lifting the corners of her mouth, and that perhaps after 50 years of silence it's time for this old nun to make a joyful noise. Sister Gabriella laughed softly. I think our roof repairs might just become the least interesting outcome of this concert. Later that afternoon, Sister Lucia and Sister Gabriella sat in Mother Beatrice's office, the notebook open on the desk between them. Paolo had insisted on coming along to advocate for the music's quality, but Sister Lucia had gently refused. This was a conversation that needed to happen within the convent family first. As Sister Lucia explained her lifetime of secret composition, Mother Beatrice listened without interrupting, her expression moving from surprise to thoughtfulness. When Sister Lucia finished speaking, the Mother Superior was quiet for a long moment. 50 years, she said finally, is a very long time to keep such a gift hidden. Sister Lucia lowered her eyes. I never meant to be deceitful. I don't believe you were, Mother Beatrice replied. I think you were being obedient to instructions given long ago, perhaps too strictly. She closed the music notebook and handed it back to Sister Lucia. Times have changed. Our understanding of how God works through us has deepened. I would very much like to hear your music, sister. Word spread quickly throughout the small convent. By dinner time, all the sisters knew that Sister Lucia, quiet, unassuming Sister Lucia, had been secretly composing music for 50 years. Some were skeptical, others curious, but all were surprised that their elderly sister had kept such a talent hidden for so long. In the weeks that followed, Sister Lucia found herself at the center of an unexpected flurry of activity. The concert, originally planned around an outside performer, was now being built around her compositions. Paolo visited the convent almost daily, working with Sister Lucia to select pieces and transform her handwritten notes into properly formatted sheet music that would be easier for performers to read. Your notation is actually quite good, Paolo told her as they sat in the convent's small library. You have a natural instinct for it, though some of your symbols are a bit unconventional. Sister Lucia smiled. I had to invent my own shorthand for some things I heard in my mind. I never thought anyone else would need to read them. As they worked through her notebook, Sister Lucia felt a strange mix of vulnerability and joy. These compositions had been her private prayers for so long that sharing them felt almost like standing naked before strangers. Yet seeing Paolo's genuine appreciation for her work brought a warmth she hadn't expected. Mother Beatrice arranged for a piano tuner to restore the convent's upright piano to its best possible condition. "We'll need it for rehearsals," she explained, though everyone understood it was also a gesture of support for Sister Lucia. The convent's phone rang more frequently than it had in years. Sister Gabriella, who had taken charge of publicity for the concert, had contacted local newspapers with the story of the elderly nun whose lifetime of compositions would be heard for the first time. A reporter from Turin had written a small but touching piece that was picked up by several other papers. "It's a human interest story," the reporter had explained. "An elderly nun who's been secretly composing music for 50 years. People are intrigued by that. Tickets for the concert sold out within 2 weeks." Mother Beatrice, seeing the unexpected interest, decided to add a second performance the following evening, which also quickly sold out. What had begun as a simple fundraiser was becoming something much larger. Through it all, Sister Lucia felt as though she were watching events unfold from a distance. Part of her still couldn't believe that her music, her most private expressions of faith and doubt, joy and longing, would soon be heard by hundreds of strangers. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Paolo had assembled a small ensemble of musician friends from his conservatory days, a violinist, a cellist, and a clarinetist, who volunteered their services for the concert. Together with Paolo on piano, they would perform 5 of Sister Lucia's compositions, selected to showcase different aspects of her work. "Will you play anything yourself, sister?" Paolo asked one afternoon as they finalized the program. Sister Lucia looked down at her gnarled hands. The arthritis had worsened with the stress and excitement of recent weeks. "I don't think these old fingers are up to it anymore," she said softly. "Perhaps just one short piece? It would mean so much to the audience to hear the composer herself." She hesitated. "There is one piece, a simple one called Morning Light that I wrote many years ago. It doesn't require much stretching of the hands. I could try that, perhaps." As the date of the concert approached, Sister Lucia found herself growing increasingly nervous. What if people didn't like her music? What if they were only coming out of curiosity about an old nun, not genuine interest in the compositions? What if 50 years of isolation from the musical world had made her work seem strange or amateur? Sister Gabriella noticed her anxiety and sat with her one evening in the convent garden. "You're worried about the concert," she observed. Sister Lucia nodded. "I've never done anything like this before. My music has always been between me and God. Now it will be out there for everyone to judge." "Not judge," Sister Gabriella corrected gently. "Experience, appreciate, be moved by." "What if they're not moved? What if it's not as good as Paolo thinks it is?" Sister Gabriella took her friend's hand. "Does it matter? The music has already served its purpose for 50 years. It's been your conversation with God. Anything beyond that is a gift, not a requirement." The night of the first performance arrived with a sky full of stars and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of the convent's rose garden. The chapel had been prepared carefully, with additional chairs brought in to accommodate the sold-out crowd. Small candles glowed in the alcoves around the stained glass windows, giving the space a warm, intimate atmosphere. Sister Lucia sat in a small anteroom adjacent to the chapel, listening to the murmur of voices as people arrived. She wore her usual habit, though Sister Gabriella had insisted on polishing her simple cross pendant and finding her a slightly newer veil for the occasion. Her hands trembled slightly as she reviewed the sheet music for Morning Light, the piece she had agreed to play. Paolo peeked in to check on her. "Almost a full house," he reported with a grin. "And I saw at least one music critic from a national newspaper." Sister Lucia felt her heart skip a beat. "A critic? You didn't mention there would be critics?" "I didn't know until I saw him." "It's a good thing, sister. It means your music is being taken seriously." Before she could respond, Mother Beatrice entered the room. "It's time," she said gently. "The chapel is full. Are you ready, Sister Lucia?" Ready or not, the moment had arrived. Sister Lucia rose slowly, feeling every one of her 78 years as she made her way to the chapel entrance. Mother Beatrice had insisted she sit in the front row until it was time for her to play, so she could experience the performance of her own works. The audience fell silent as Mother Beatrice stepped to the front to welcome them. She spoke briefly about the convent's need for repairs, but then shifted to the remarkable story of Sister Lucia and her lifetime of hidden composition. "Tonight is not merely a fundraiser," she concluded. "It is a celebration of faith, perseverance, and the creative spirit that can flourish even in the most unexpected circumstances. We are honored to share Sister Lucia's music with you after 50 years of silence. Paolo and his ensemble took their places. The lights dimmed slightly, focusing attention on the musicians. A hush fell over the chapel as Paolo nodded to his colleagues and then began to play the opening notes of Echoes of Faith. Sister Lucia closed her eyes as the music filled the chapel. The acoustics were even better than she had imagined, carrying each note clearly to every corner of the room. The piece sounded both familiar and new. The notes were exactly as she had written them, but hearing them played by skilled musicians gave them a richness her imagination hadn't fully captured. She opened her eyes and glanced around at the audience. They sat motionless, completely absorbed in the music. No coughing, no shuffling, no whispered comments, just rapt attention to the sounds flowing around them. When the piece ended, there was a moment of perfect silence before the applause began, tentative at first, then building to an enthusiastic response that seemed to make the old walls vibrate. Sister Lucia felt tears gathering in her eyes. For the first time, her music had touched others as it had touched her. The ensemble continued with the second piece, River of Grace, a composition inspired by Sister Lucia's memories of the stream that ran through her childhood village. The flowing melody was passed from piano to violin to cello and back again, creating a musical current that seemed to carry the listeners along its path. Again, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Sister Lucia noticed that some people in the audience had closed their eyes, just as she often did when listening to music that moved her. Others leaned forward in their seats as if trying to catch every note. The third piece, Winter Prayers, was more somber, reflecting the isolation and sometimes desolation of the convent's cold winter months. The clarinet took a leading role here, its haunting tone perfect for expressing both loneliness and the hope that sustains through dark seasons. By the fourth piece, Dance of Light, a more joyful composition inspired by sunlight playing through the chapel's stained glass, Sister Lucia realized something remarkable was happening. The audience wasn't just listening politely to an old woman's amateur efforts. They were genuinely moved by her music. She could see it in their faces, in the way they responded to each shift in tone and tempo. All too soon, it was time for the final scheduled piece before her own performance. Paolo announced Cathedral of Memory, explaining that it was one of Sister Lucia's most complex works, combining elements of traditional sacred music with more modern harmonies. As the ensemble played, Sister Lucia felt a lifetime of emotions washing through her. The young girl who had loved the piano, the novice who had hidden her gift, the woman who had poured her soul into music no one would hear. All those years of silent creativity were now finding voice in this chapel, filled with strangers who were quickly becoming friends through the shared experience of her music. When Cathedral of Memory ended, the applause was so enthusiastic that it took several minutes to quiet the audience. Paolo finally stood and raised his hands for silence. For our final piece tonight, he announced, we have something very special. The composer herself, Sister Lucia Bianchi, will perform her composition, Morning Light. A murmur of excitement rippled through the audience as Sister Lucia rose slowly from her seat. Sister Gabriella gave her arm a supportive squeeze as she made her way to the piano. Her legs felt unsteady, and her heart pounded so loudly she wondered if those in the front row could hear it. The piano bench seemed both familiar and strange as she carefully sat down. She positioned her hands over the keys, noticing how the candlelight made the blue veins stand out against her pale skin. For a moment she felt a flash of panic. What if her arthritic fingers failed her now in front of all these people? She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then, without looking at the sheet music she knew by heart, she began to play. The first notes of Morning Light rose into the silence, simple, clear notes that captured the moment when darkness gives way to dawn. Her fingers moved with a sureness that surprised her, finding the keys as if guided by something beyond her conscious mind. The pain in her joints seemed to recede as the music flowed through her. As Sister Lucia's fingers moved across the piano keys, something extraordinary happened. The pain in her joints that had troubled her for years seemed to fade away, replaced by a flowing warmth that spread from her heart to her fingertips. The notes of Morning Light filled the chapel, pure and clear, like the first rays of dawn breaking through darkness. The piece was simpler than the others performed that evening, a gentle, melodic composition that spoke of hope and new beginnings. But there was something in the way Sister Lucia played it that touched everyone in the room. Perhaps it was the sight of her elderly hands moving with unexpected grace over the keys. Perhaps it was knowing this music had waited 50 years to be heard. Or perhaps it was simply the music itself, honest, unpretentious, and deeply felt. As the final notes faded into silence, Sister Lucia kept her eyes closed, her hands still resting lightly on the keys. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. The silence was not awkward but reverent, as if the audience needed time to absorb what they had experienced. Then the applause began, not the polite appreciation given to amateur performances, but a genuine outpouring of emotion. People rose to their feet, their faces showing the kind of joy that comes from witnessing something authentic and beautiful. Several were wiping away tears. Sister Lucia finally opened her eyes, looking startled at the standing ovation. She had been so absorbed in the music that she had almost forgotten the audience was there. Now, faced with their response, she felt overwhelmed. She attempted to stand but found her legs unsteady. Paolo quickly moved to her side, offering his arm for support as she rose from the piano bench. Mother Beatrice came forward with a small bouquet of flowers from the convent garden. "Thank you, sister," she said, her usually composed voice thick with emotion, "for sharing your gift with us at last." The audience continued applauding as Sister Lucia made her way back to her seat. Sister Gabriella squeezed her hand tightly, too moved for words. After the performance, a small reception was held in the convent's main hall. Despite her fatigue, Sister Lucia found herself surrounded by people eager to speak with her, not just locals from the surrounding villages, but visitors who had traveled from Turin and even Milan after reading about the concert. The music critic from the national newspaper approached her, notebook in hand. "Sister Lucia, your compositions are remarkably original. They don't quite fit into any conventional category. There are elements of classical structure but harmonies that feel almost contemporary. How would you describe your musical influences?" The question caught her off guard. Influences? I'm not sure I had any, really. I never studied composition formally. I just wrote what I heard in my heart. The critic looked intrigued. "You developed your style in isolation then, without reference to contemporary musical trends?" "I suppose I did," Sister Lucia replied thoughtfully. "When I was young, I heard some classical music, Bach, Mozart, Chopin. But after I entered the convent, I heard very little outside music. Just church hymns mostly." "Extraordinary," the critic murmured, making notes. "A completely authentic voice developed outside any school or movement." Other guests had similar questions, all seeming amazed that someone with no formal training could create such sophisticated compositions. Sister Lucia answered as best she could, though she found it difficult to explain a process that had always been intuitive, rather than technical for her. A gray-haired woman in an elegant black dress introduced herself as a representative from a recording company in Milan. "We would be very interested in producing an album of your composition, Sister Lucia. Your music has a quality that's increasingly rare in today's world, a genuine emotional directness combined with technical sophistication." Sister Lucia blinked in surprise. "An album? I never imagined." "Think about it," the woman said, handing her a business card. "We believe there would be significant interest in your work." By the time the last guest departed, it was nearly midnight, far later than the convent's usual quiet hours. Sister Lucia was exhausted but too full of swirling thoughts and emotions to sleep. Sister Gabriella walked with her to her room, both women silent until they reached the door. "Are you all right?" Sister Gabriella asked, noticing how overwhelmed her friend looked. "I'm not sure," Sister Lucia replied honestly. "Everything's happening so fast. This morning I was just Sister Lucia, the elderly music teacher. Now people are talking about recordings and articles and a second concert tomorrow." She shook her head in disbelief. "You're still Sister Lucia," Sister Gabriella said gently. "You've just finally allowed others to see a part of you that was hidden for too long." That night, Sister Lucia slept fitfully, her dreams filled with music and faceless crowds. She woke early, as was her lifelong habit, and went to the chapel to pray in the quiet dawn light. The space looked different in the morning, smaller, more familiar. Yet she could still feel the echoes of the previous night's performance hanging in the air. "I don't know what you want from me now," she whispered, looking up at the crucifix above the altar. "For 50 years my music was just between us. Now it belongs to the world in some way. Please show me the path forward. The second concert that evening was as successful as the first. Word had spread about the remarkable nun and her music, and several people who couldn't get tickets stood outside the chapel windows just to hear what they could. Again, Sister Lucia played Morning Light as the finale, and again she received a standing ovation. In the days that followed, Sister Lucia's life took a turn she could never have anticipated. The music critic's glowing review appeared in one of Italy's most respected newspapers, describing her as an important new voice in contemporary classical music, all the more remarkable for her age and unconventional background. Other publications picked up the story, and requests for interviews began coming into the convent. Mother Beatrice, seeing both the opportunity and the potential stress for Sister Lucia, appointed Sister Gabriella as a kind of manager to handle these requests and shield the elderly composer from too much attention. 2 weeks after the concert, the convent received news that donations for the repair fund had far exceeded their goal. The story of the elderly nun's hidden musical gifts had touched people's hearts, and many who couldn't attend the concerts had sent contributions anyway. God works in mysterious ways indeed, Mother Beatrice said during their morning meeting. What began as a simple fundraiser has become something much more significant, not just for our convent, but for the wider world of music. Paolo continued to visit regularly, helping Sister Lucia prepare more of her compositions for future performances. A small recording studio was set up in the convent's library, and plans were made to record an album of her work, with Paolo and his ensemble playing most pieces, but Sister Lucia performing Morning Light herself. "Your hands seem better," Paolo observed one afternoon as they worked. "You're moving more freely at the piano." Sister Lucia looked down at her fingers in surprise. The swelling had indeed decreased and the constant ache had lessened. "Perhaps it's having a purpose for them again," she said with a small smile. As summer turned to fall, Sister Lucia's album, titled Hidden Devotions, was released by the Milan Recording Company. The cover featured a simple photograph of her hands on the piano keys, her plain gold cross visible at her wrist. No one had expected it to sell widely, but something about her story and the pure, emotional quality of her music resonated with people, far beyond the classical music. Community reviews praised the album's spiritual depth and authentic voice. One critic wrote that in an age of manufactured music, Sister Lucia's compositions reminded listeners what it means to create from the heart rather than the algorithm. Most surprising of all was a letter that arrived in October from the Grammy Awards Committee, informing Sister Lucia that Hidden Devotions had been nominated in the Best Classical Album category. "They want you to attend the ceremony in New York," Sister Gabriella told her, eyes wide with excitement as she read the invitation. Sister Lucia shook her head in disbelief. "New York, me? Surely not." "Why not?" Sister Gabriella challenged. "Your music has touched thousands of people already. Why shouldn't it reach even more?" The question of whether to travel to New York became the subject of much discussion within the convent. Some of the more traditional sisters felt it was too worldly an event for a nun to attend. Others argued that sharing Sister Lucia's God-given talent with a wider audience was a form of ministry in itself. In the end, Mother Beatrice made the decision. "You will go," she told Sister Lucia firmly, "not for acclaim or recognition, but as a witness to how faith and creativity can flourish even in hidden places. Besides," she added with an uncharacteristic twinkle in her eye, "I've always wanted to see New York through someone else's eyes." And so, in February, just a few months before her 80th birthday, Sister Lucia Bianchi found herself in a glittering auditorium in New York City, dressed in her simple black habit amid crowds of celebrities in designer clothes. Sister Gabriella and Paolo had accompanied her on the journey, both serving as protective escorts and delighting in her wide-eyed wonder at this world so different from her quiet convent life. When Hidden Devotions was announced as the winner in its category, the audience erupted in applause. Many had been captivated by the story of the elderly nun whose music had remained hidden for 50 years. Sister Lucia made her way slowly to the stage, declining Paolo's offer of assistance. As she accepted the award, the hall fell silent, waiting for her speech. "I am not used to speaking to so many people," she began softly, her Italian accent more pronounced under the bright lights. For most of my life, my conversations have been with God and my sisters in the convent. My music was the same, a private devotion never meant for public ears. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. But I have learned that sometimes our most personal expressions are also our most universal. What comes truly from the heart can speak to other hearts, crossing boundaries of age, culture, and belief. She held up the award, her aged hand steady now. I accept this honor not just for myself, but for all those whose gifts remain hidden, by circumstance, by fear, or by the simple rhythms of ordinary life. It is never too late for your light to shine. Thank you. The applause that followed her simple speech was deafening. As she made her way back to her seat, Sister Lucia felt a deep sense of peace. The path that had begun with a little girl reaching up to touch piano keys in a humble Italian village had taken the most unexpected turn in its final stretch. But somehow it all felt right, as if every note she had written in those 50 years of silence had been leading to this moment of being truly heard. Back at the convent of St. Cecilia, life eventually settled into a new rhythm. Sister Lucia continued to teach the village children, though now her students came with a new sense of awe, having heard about their teacher's international recognition. She still rose early for prayers and participated in the daily life of the community. But 3 mornings a week were now officially dedicated to composition. The false bottom in her old chest was no longer needed. Her music notebook sat proudly on a shelf in her room, alongside the Grammy Award and newspaper clippings about her unexpected late-life success. On her 80th birthday, the convent organized a special concert in the chapel, featuring students from music schools across Italy, performing her works. Sitting in the front row, listening to young musicians breathe life into compositions she had once thought no one would ever hear, Sister Lucia felt her life had come full circle. Did you ever imagine this would happen? Sister Gabriella whispered beside her. Sister Lucia shook her head slightly. God's compositions are always more surprising than our own, she replied with a smile. We just have to be willing to play the notes.